Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. The World Health Organization, WHO, released the final report on its investigation into the origins of the pandemic causing coronavirus on Tuesday, saying COVID-19 introduction through an intermediate host was considered to be likely to very likely. It concluded a laboratory leak is an extremely unlikely source. The report cited 4 possible sources for the virus, and the most likely one is via an intermediate animal host, possibly a wild animal captured and then raised on a farm. Chinese and WHO experts put together the report after jointly working in Wuhan earlier this year, researching virus origin. The findings showed that some of the suspected positive samples were detected even earlier than the first case in Wuhan, suggesting the possibility of missed circulation in other countries.
We may have to verify those reports through further study, and we believe those leads may be useful for us to identify the exact timing of the outbreak, the possible animal host, natural host. Such efforts are worthwhile. The expert team has made recommendations in this connection. So in multiple countries and regions, in a global context, the study should continue.
So what else can we learn from the report? After the report being released, what's next? And how will it help global efforts to control the pandemic? Let's loop in our panelists from China, South Korea, and the United States. For more on WHO report on COVID-19 origins, joining us in Seoul, Dr. Alice Hin Kyang Tan, internist at Ms. Medi Women's Hospital. In New York, Vincent Raccaniello, who is the Higgins Professor at the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the Columbia University. Last but not least, in Beijing, Ding Sheng from the Institute of GHDDI. He's the director there and also dean of the School of Pharmaceutical Sciences with Tsinghua University. Welcome to all of you. I feel so powerful now, joined by real experts, rather than talking heads when we are talking about a pandemic. Let me start by asking every one of you your latest feedback and takeaway from the report released by WHO on Tuesday regarding the virus origin, the joint research between China and WHO teams. Let's have Mr. Raccaniello, Professor.
Well, I have to say, I obtained it yesterday. I read the whole thing, and it's very comprehensive. And I think it's important to point out that the most likely possibility for the origin of SARS-CoV-2 is that it went from an animal somewhere, most likely a bat, to a human. And now the important task is to find out when and where that happened, and to ignore all the other hearsay that has been permeating the news for so long.
It's so important to focus on the science part of it. Otherwise, we are going to be dragged to nowhere. Professor Ding, what about your take?
I think from the report, all the evidence actually collected so far has been actually quite consistent with actually what we gradually learned from over the year, in the past year. As I agree with Vincent, the report points to perhaps the possibility of origin from bat, but through perhaps another intermediate host, ultimately to human. Still very important to find out when and what is that intermediate host. Those would be those information would be useful for all of us for the future.
What about for you, Dr. Tan? Since you are looking at the things from, from a practitioner's perspective, in a way.
Report, it gave us some direction, I think, in terms of where to look further. We knew from the beginning that this was going to be like looking for a very, very small needle in a very, very big haystack. But in terms of direction, I think the arrows have pointed not just to China, but also Southeast Asia as a geographical area to look into. They raised the possibility of other secondary animals that might be involved in further propagation, such as mink and also domesticated animals, specifically cats. I think overall, the take-home message is that this search is going to be ongoing and it needs to be an international effort.
Yeah.
And it involves looking not just at wildlife sources, but also potentially looking through the supply chain in terms of commercial food sources and animal husbandry as well.
Yeah.
And so certainly, we were not able to find a definitive animal source, nor were we able to find the definitive intermediary animal. And so the investigation will be ongoing.
I remember listening to the press conference given by the research teams, particularly from the WHO side, from the very beginning to the end. There are many of them, in fact, among all the members coming from different parts of the world, Professor Recanello, suggesting that people who are looking for immediate answers should really look at history about how a virus origin can be traced and how long usually that would take, and some are still having no answers. Professor Recanello, are we going to experience something similar?
We can learn from other examples. HIV, the origins of HIV. We discovered the virus in 1981 in people in Los Angeles, and it wasn't until 10 years later that we found out that it had originated in Africa. 10 years. Same with SARS-1. It took many years to find a virus that was very, very close to SARS in a civet. So I think we need to be very patient because here, as Alice said, it could involve much of Asia and Southeast Asia because the range of these bats is quite wide. And so it's going to take a lot of people doing wildlife sampling, a lot of laboratory work, and maybe by then a lot of people will have forgotten about it.
Very sad about that, I'm sure, the last sentence you just said, Professor Recanello, because that's also what I feel quite interesting. Among all the questions being asked at that press conference, given the fact that some of the information already being leaked out earlier, days earlier, and given the fact that all the journalists are having some kinds of preview already by the team when it comes to the Q&A session, very few of them really touch on the research part of it, but rather mostly still focusing on the speculation part of it, which is, lab related. Now, that's very interesting to me because I'm wondering, Professor Recanello, how much of this is real, human curiosity and necessity to know what is harming us, and how much of it is really this fanfare, eyeballs, just clicks on my story. I really wonder about this. Sorry, being a host, I should ask very neutral questions, but this is my takeaway. I'm sure, and I'm afraid it's very, very strong, this takeaway I had when I listened to the press conference. Professor?
I think that most people do not understand viruses. They do not understand how viruses go from animals to humans. They have no sense of virology history. And so when they want an answer, they can't supply it. They can't interpret the science. And so they go to rumors and hearsay. They want to blame someone, and the easiest thing to do is to make things up and blame. And that's not how science works, as you know. And that's why many scientists never believed any of that. And I've been working very hard, by the way, to convince many people here that this did come, in fact, from an animal. So I think in the end, it's because people are scared and they want an explanation for something they don't understand.
We hope this will be a good start, for the science to spread around at least, and cool people down about what is really a pandemic, the nature of it. Having said that, though, let me move on to the next question. We don't want to make this conversation political because there's so many important things that we need to handle. Now, Professor Ding, tell me more about, with still lack of knowledge of the virus, its origin, what's going to be the next step for the pharmaceutical side, for example, for finding the cure, for working still to better the vaccination, the vaccines that we have in our world today?
Actually, over the last year, our biopharma industry and also biomedical researcher actually have been working really hard actually to find a cure or treatment, as well as actually vaccines for counter COVID-19, this particular virus. Certainly, I think our community actually has made tremendous progress, success actually in many ways in this regard. For example, we already have actually a very good, effective vaccines, multiple kinds of vaccines for preventing actually infection, especially for preventing very effectively disease getting into sort of a severe stage of the disease. So that's actually very successful, and all of us know actually the community, the pharma continue actually to develop the next generation vaccines to update the antigen for actually newly appeared variants. Also on the pharmaceutical side, now the neutralizing antibody actually were approved for actually the mild to moderate sort of disease setting. That actually appeared to be quite effective in the clinical trials. And again, now actually we understood much better the disease progression. All of that actually will help the industry to develop new medicine, and also the oral sort of a form of a certain medicine has also been more recently developed into clinical trials. Those are all very promising developments.
What about to you, Dr. Tan?
You know, many countries have started, many countries have not even received one drop of vaccine yet, and yet we are struggling with what to do about the variants that are emerging. The good news is that the pharmaceutical companies, as was mentioned, you know, they're already working on version 2.0, the next generation of vaccines. And I think people should realize, just in terms of anticipatory guidance, that vaccination against COVID-19 will not end in 2021. This is going to be a prolonged campaign in terms of determining the schedule for the booster, whether or not it will be a third dose of the original vaccine or you know, a new version 2.0 vaccine. We're still working that out. And I think what people should realize as well is that our best bet going forward is actually trying to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, sort of as a strong foundation for moving forward to prevent the emergence of more variants. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy here in Korea, and I know around the world. And we need to work, I think, harder as a scientific community, but also in public health, to overcome that vaccine hesitancy so that we get good uptake in the communities as fast as we can.
Professor Raccaniello, with still little we know about the virus, and now with new variants and new spikes of cases in some countries, despite it is already the spring season that's coming. So what is really the next step? What's going to be the rest of 2021 look like?
Well, unfortunately, these spikes happen, at least here in the U.S., and I think in many countries in Europe, because people think it's over, and they take their masks off and go back to their lives as usual. They go to restaurants, they hang out, and that's what happens when not everyone is immunized. So that's not surprising. There's nothing unusual there. But what we need to do is immunize as many people as we can. As Alice said, many countries don't have any vaccine, and this is a tragedy, whereas others have a lot of vaccine and they can't even distribute it.
Yeah.
So I think we have to spend the next months vaccinating extensively. The good news, I think, is that many of the vaccines prevent death and hospitalization with the variants. And so antibodies are not the whole story. And we've just learned in the past few weeks that T cells are important to keep you well. And they don't change. The T cells the parts of T cells that recognize the virus-infected cells don't change in the variants. And so that's possibly the best news that I've heard this year.
You know, I'm thinking, what is going to be the biggest challenge we have today? Is it really about science, or is it really about the attitudes towards science and the attitude toward one another that we really have to overcome this time? Professor Ding, you want to shine some light on that?
As I already mentioned, I think the whole biopharma industry, biomedical research community have been actually quite working very hard, and
Yes.
also have been successful in terms of developing those vaccines and other treatments. And now perhaps at this particular stage, actually really advocating for getting the vaccination and again of different kinds actually as quickly as possible. And also still actually before actually getting vaccinated, still exercising the prevention control. Those practices actually are
Right.
still very important.
Now, Professor Ding, as you may know, China, with the latest news, new domestic cases, 6 of them, all in southwest China's Yunnan province. Now, this is the very first time after a long time of zero domestic cases, only cases that are coming from tourists from outside. So, Professor Ding, how do you look at the latest situation? Many believe springtime, things will be much better, and yet this is a great warning, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still actually trying to understand this, very small outbreak in this case. Find out actually, how actually that really happened. But again, over the last year, we've seen this actually over and over again. It will not end actually over some time until perhaps more and more people are getting vaccinated. Again, from different parts of the world, we're seeing the new variants. So this will be an ongoing activity, events. I think once actually we were getting actually more people vaccinated, having actually better treatment, actually, I think the society, the whole globe actually will come to actually a better state.
This will be a prolonged battle compared to the early expectation, Professor Raccaniello. But who is fighting against what? Or are we fighting against ourselves, at least among ourselves?
Well, that's a pretty broad question there. We made decisions to make certain kinds of vaccines very early on. And, in retrospect, they might have not been the best. Here in the U.S., we're mainly focused on spike protein. And it may have been wiser to use more viral proteins to avoid some of the variants that are arising. But I still feel that if we continue vaccination at a rapid pace, we can have this controlled by the fall. I mean, I'm thinking about the U.S. here, but we have to have people behaving and leave their masks on for a while and not gather. And maybe when we get 70% of the population immunized, that we can get it under control. But as you say, it's not going away ever. This virus is with us to stay.
Dr. Tan?
I think you raised a very good point, and it's the psychology that's involved, it's the economics that's involved, it's the sociology that's involved in the pandemic. It's not just the science. The scientists have done a great job, doing what they do.
Yeah.
Research, development. I think what we needed to have done better is better communication with the public in terms of messaging, in terms of engagement, in terms of also addressing all of these horrible psychological impacts, sociological impacts, economic impacts. I don't think that we looked at this sort of in the whole package that we needed to from the beginning. And it caused a lot of fatigue, a lot of mental illness, and it just made us, as you said, it's as if we're fighting against ourselves to overcome this disease. And so in the future, I think we need to do a better job with engagement and also looking at the other, not just the scientific aspect, but the other more human and sociological aspects of the pandemic, and that will help us overcome ultimately what we're dealing with.
The scientists have been amazing in this overall fight. But the latest news, for example, from Afghanistan, some of the vaccination workers were being killed in this latest 5-day campaign against polio in that country. It certainly shows, how vulnerable we are in terms of, supporting science in front of the public in different parts of the world. Well, that was reflected in the cases of killing, but there are other cases in different parts of the world, even in some of the most advanced economies, that the attitude towards science and towards scientists are beyond words, shall I put it this way. So before we go, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you about what do you consider for the next stage priority in terms of our fight against COVID-19? Some of them is about how we organize ourselves, for example, whether we have vaccine passport and we can travel again, how the borders will work. Part of it is about the science part, what's the next stage for the research and everything. And part of it is about, the international policies about who gets the vaccine, how, and who will produce it, who will pay for it. So all of these are mind-boggling questions. I just want to have your expertise in understanding what is on the top of your mind, your personal thoughts. Dr. Tan.
Here in Korea, it's really overcoming vaccine hesitancy, making sure that we get information out to the people that is clear, easy to understand, transparent, and having a good rollout. Of course, we're dealing with supply issues, even as we are one of the biggest manufacturers of vaccines through contract manufacturing. We are also facing shortages and delays in vaccines coming in.
Right.
But once the vaccines are available, convincing people and having a good strategy for rollout so that everyone who needs a vaccine, and that is every adult right now, eventually gets one. I think that is going to be our priority. A lot of people are suspicious still about the vaccines. AstraZeneca, there's a lot of controversy now about side effects, potential side effects, and that causes fear and hesitancy. And I think what we need to do is, make sure that we can guarantee to people that what we are offering is safe and efficacious, and that it will work. And this is really our only hope of getting over the pandemic. The messaging and convincing people to bear their arms and get their shots, that's going to be the biggest challenge and important challenge going forward.
Got it. Professor Ding, to you, what's on top of your mind?
I think we'll continue to do the surveillance and also continue to develop better vaccine and also treatment. But it's also, in my mind, it's really, given what we have learned actually so far, especially in China, overall the situation is actually quite excellent. We could actually gradually to look at actually what really worked and how actually we can do better in terms of opening up the economy, the communication and the traveling actually with our global partners.
Professor Raccaniello, what's on top of your mind?
I'm actually looking towards the next pandemic because there will be one. There will be another one when a virus in some animal somewhere spills over into humans. And this one has shown us that we were terribly prepared. We should have been prepared. We knew from SARS-1 that these things could happen, and we didn't do anything about it. We didn't develop any vaccines. We didn't develop any antivirals. We could have made them that would inhibit any coronavirus. That's within our grasp. So I'm hoping we've learned a lesson, and we will continue not just to develop these antivirals and vaccines specific for SARS-CoV-2, but make broadly active antivirals and vaccines against all coronaviruses that could possibly come from, say, bats or possibly other sources. And then we could stop it before it even spreads internationally. I'm hoping that we've learned a lesson and we can do that.
I don't know about all of you, but I feel a relief in a way after reading the WHO report that it is about science and that we could, at least wrap up the earlier stages of debate and move on to the next stage of real work, roll up their sleeves and do something. I don't know whether it's the same of you, but for now, I want to thank all of you for joining us. As always, really appreciate all your work on your different fronts. Thank you so much. Vincent Raccaniello, Alice King Kyang Tan, Ding Sheng, really appreciate it. Thank you.